Welcome to another Real Estate Talk Show, featuring highlights of the best interviews from our national real estate radio show. Here's another property expert.
I have an interesting guest on the line now, John Keating from Keating's Real Estate in Victoria. The reason I want to talk to John is because he headed up an interesting forum in Melbourne yesterday, Friday, and the point of the discussion was, should reserves at an auction be disclosed prior to the auction? He joins me. Hello, John.
Hello, Kevin. How are you?
Well, thank you. A very interesting thought, this one, because in Queensland, of course, under current legislation, the agent can have no discussion about price whatsoever with a potential buyer, but you're talking about a 180-degree turn.
Absolutely. I've been studying this and thinking about it and putting into practice now for several years in our own business. We think that one of the most attested practices down here, and insidious practices, that's impacting on consumers of real estate agency services is the issues of underquoting to purchasers and overquoting to vendors. And there's a problem, something's got to be done about it, and the only way that I think it can be fixed would be by legislation within the states, each state, that required vendors to and their estate agents to publish their auction reserve prices right at the start of the campaign, so that it appears in all their ads and on brochures, etc.
Now, John, you said that you've been doing this for some time in your agency in Melbourne. Can you tell us what reaction you get from both buyers and sellers?
We started our first auction 7 years ago, and most of our auctions the last 2.5 years we've done it, and we're getting really positive reaction from purchasers because they know exactly where they stand. They're not wasting their time making appointments, arranging to look at the property, organising building inspections and pest inspections, etc. And we're also getting very positive reactions from vendors. It takes a lot of the stress out of the auctions from the vendors, and provided the agents have set everything up right, and it does require a different skill set from the agent, but to get a realistic reserve price from the vendor, it then makes it very straightforward that you're attracting, driving qualified purchasers to the auction, and it takes a lot of the stress out of the vendors. And an interesting aspect is we're getting quite a number of vendors coming to us saying, look, we see how straight you're being with purchasers. If you're going to be straight with purchasers, clearly you're going to be straight with us as a vendor.
John, there is a thought that most sellers want more than their property's worth. And I mean, I'm a current seller, and I can attest to that fact. You know, I want more than my house is worth. And I've got to tell you that I'm a real estate agent, so I should know. So given that that's the case, if I were to set a reserve on the property that I'm selling now, it's probably going to be too high, which potentially could drive a number of buyers away. So how do you as an agent handle that?
Well, in building our relationship with you, we as the agent, you as the vendor, we're going to try to demonstrate to you what we think is a realistically fair figure. And if we're giving good information to you, you will probably accept that and agree. And if we can agree on a realistic reserve figure and we publicise that, it all will flow very actively from there. Now, if we attract qualified purchasers and multiple numbers of purchasers, when we get to auction, it's then the auctioneer's role to use his craft in auctioneering to solicit higher bids from each purchaser, competing against one another in an open, fair, transparent market, and not a market that's been artificially manipulated by the vendor or his agent together.
John, hypothetically, as a seller, if I set a reserve and it's published before the auction, doesn't that then take away my right to sell it under that reserve if come the day of auction there's little or no bidding?
Well, with what I'm proposing is the vendor should have the right to, if the interest is not as strong in your situation, to decrease the reserve but not to increase it. If the interest from the buyers is strong, there is no need to increase the reserve because it's going to happen under auction conditions anyway. But if everybody's misjudged the market, the agent and you as the vendor, and really the market's saying to you it's not worth that much, you would have the right to decrease the reserve price and alter the publication of the reserve price that you publish, so that you could then try to stimulate interest at a lower figure.
Most agents will tell a potential seller if there's any chance of getting a premium price, the only way to do it is by going to auction, and the only way that you can do that is by not disclosing a reserve, which means that the buyer doesn't necessarily know the reserve has even been reached until the auctioneer knocks it down. The point I'm trying to make here is, wouldn't this, if we disclose a reserve, wouldn't this then take away the opportunity for the seller to sell at a premium price?
I don't think at all. I think we've got to get all of that mystique out of the way, because a lot of people won't in fact bid until the agent says, or the auctioneer says, the property's on the market. And then you see people coming into the auction. If they know that it's fair competition they're up against, and it's up against other bidders, that's the environs, the competitive nature of the auction, where it does work best. People want to be able to win the contest. They desire to have the property. Their heart says is what they want, but they compete against others, and that's how auctions work the best.
Well, John, thank you very much for giving us your time today and for raising this, because I know it's an issue that is going to be talked around Australia, and I wish you well, and please keep us in touch.
Good on you. Thanks very much.
Just in closing, though, I think for this to happen, there has to be some form of national, you touched on this at the start, there has to be some form of national legislation, doesn't there?
Oh, look, I think that the only way that it can work is for legislation to be introduced by each state that does require the vendors and their agents to publish the reserves. It won't work otherwise, because institutes, not everybody's members of the institutes, and the institutes have difficulty policing their members. In fact, unfortunately, they're quite impotent in most of the institutes in implementing their own pricing guidelines, and it's the same with each of the individual states' consumer bodies, I think, that they've had difficulty implementing their guidelines. So it will only be if legislation can be introduced in each state that it will work, and that's what I'm hoping that this meeting that we're running will be the catalyst towards achieving at some stage.
Good on you, John. All the best, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Okay.